welcome. Today we're going to be talking about women in theater and the weaker sex's imprint on the world of drama and theater. So that's a really big, broad topic. So I am not going to be talking about how women, their prohibition in the theater world and how the religion took part in that. We're going to really zero in on 4 people. Let's put some faces to the ones who brought about change for women in theater. So let's get to it. So I was looking for women that were fierce and had something to bring to the theater world, something notable. And I wanted to get a good scope of her history and location and what have you. So none of these women come from the same country and none of them are from the same century. So let's get started. The first one on the left is a nun. Her name is Hrothsvitha. Then the second lady we have, her name is Aphra Behn, and she was an Englishwoman. And the third one you have there is, her name is quite a mouthful, her name is Swarnakumari Devi. And then the one on the far right, that is Vinnette Carroll. So we'll be talking a little bit about each of these, and I will tell you why they are fierce and what they did for women in theater. All right, Hrothsvitha. So Hrothsvitha caught my attention. Actually, she caught many people's attention because she is a very unusual person on the political and religious and social landscape of the Middle Ages. So I'm going to start off with each of these women. There's a quote that sort of sums up what I have learned about them and what their mark on the theater world was. So Hrothsvitha wrote, I intend to substitute for the picture of the dissipation of pagan women edifying stories of pure virgins to celebrate the victories of chastity, especially those where women's weakness triumphs over man's brutality. Basically, her aim in theater, or not in theater, but in writing her plays, is that she wanted to change the status quo. Now, I find this very interesting because she's a nun, and it is the 10th century, and the Pope and the Roman Catholic Church have all the power in Europe, and they are trying to squelch out the arts, and especially squelching out plays because they're immoral and they're scandalous, and women shouldn't be on any kind of performing. They can't sing, they can't, nothing. Like, it's all wrong. But then all of a sudden you have this really random little nun in a convent, and she's writing plays, but not only is she writing plays, but it's actually becoming a little bit, she's gathering some attention. So how did that happen? Why is that? Let's learn about Hrothsvitha. So Hrothsvitha, we don't really know much about like how when she was born exactly. We just have estimates. We think that she came from a privileged background, mostly because of her location. She lived for the majority of her life in the Gandersheim convent in Germany. Now, the Gandersheim her living there is the reason why I think that she got into the prominence of being a playwright, because the Gandersheim convent was not your typical strict nunnery. There was something a little bit different because it was dubbed an intellectual oasis. And the reason for this is that they believed because many of the nobility of Eastern Europe were sending their daughters and their sisters to become nuns at this convent. But because of that connection, essentially these are princesses and counts, countesses, and just really high-profile women. And because of that connection, this convent got a lot of patrons, and these nobles were sending lots of money and bringing in, with that money, bringing in all the education and culture. But it was with a twist, though. They weren't bringing in corruption, per se. They, yes, were bringing in the arts and education in classical literature, but they weren't bringing in sin. And that's why I think that she wasn't squelched out. That's why I think Hrothsvitha's work was respected. Now, she wrote in refined Latin. She didn't write in the common Latin of the day, so it probably made her a little bit less accessible. And on top of that, she was probably inaccessible from the beginning because most people couldn't read, and it was very hard to, it was a luxury to own a book because they were all had to be handwritten. But she wrote for the nobility. She did a lot more than just writing plays. She only wrote about 6 or 7, and they were comedies. She did a lot of poetry and essay writing and legends and that sort of thing. But she did write comedies, and we want to focus on those plays. The way that she wrote was inspired by the education that she had received. She was very, very well versed on church history, the early church fathers. She knew very much about the religion, the Christian religion, and that showed up in her work. But there was a funny little thing influencing her as well, as it kind of slipped in, is although she was really ignorant of the classical plays like Aristotle and the Greek and Roman theater, she didn't know very much about that. That was not part of her education. But, and I'm thinking this had something to do with those nobles, she was very familiar with Terence, who does not come to mind as a top ancient Roman playwright. We usually think of others. But a little side note about Terence, just so we understand Hrothsvitha a little bit better. Terence was a slave. He was of Phoenician nationality. He was born in Carthage, which is in North Africa, in 150 BC. So this is even before Jesus was born. And a Roman man bought him and quickly figured out that this slave, Terence, is extremely bright. And so he emancipated him and gave him a nobleman's education, and his career took off. He wrote for the aristocracy. So his plays, Terence wasn't a huge success and not as popular, and this is probably why we don't really know about him as much, is that he was more of a hit with the upper crust. But unfortunately, he ended up dying in a shipwreck. He was lost at sea at age 30. But for some reason, Hrothsvitha got a hold of his works, and he had an influence on the way that she wrote and her style. His plays tended to focus on the movements of the finer details in society, and just the style of how he wrote, how clean and refined it was, that influenced her. But the one thing that I want to draw back to Hrothsvitha and why she is fierce is that she wanted to set the record straight about women. Not only was the Catholic Church trying to squelch drama and theater and art in general, they had some good reasons for that. A lot of the plays written back then, theater in general, was bawdy and kind of dirty and crass and crude. And on top of that, they were written by men, and a lot of times the women characters were not shown as being moral or strong-willed or anything. They just were weak, and they weren't people to look up to. So she strove, and as we saw in that quote, she strove to write women who were strong and moral, and that was very countercultural. That was very unusual for the time. And finally, the other thing that would classify her as being fierce is the fact that she sort of bridges the gap between ancient drama that was written in the Roman and Greek times and the drama that came around the time of Shakespeare. There really wasn't a lot going on in that time, or at least there's nothing that's preserved because of the church. She kind of got a pass. So she's our bridge, and it's a woman, and I love that. And I love that she strove to not do away with theater, but to fix it. And not only should she do that from a moral standpoint, but also from a feminist standpoint. And that is why she is fierce. Aphra Behn, she is very different from Hrothsvitha, and we'll go into that. So Aphra Behn once said, "All I ask is the privilege for my masculine part, the poet in me, if any such you will allow me, to tread in those successful paths my predecessors have so long thrived in." Basically, she has a similar a similar goal to Hrothsvitha, but she takes it a step further. Not only does she want to be, um, she wants women to be written by women and have that accuracy on point, but she wanted to make it she wanted to be recognized for it. Hrothsvitha was a nun who wrote plays that were suspected to be acted out by the nuns, but she wasn't looking at that as her source of income or something to be recognized for. That was probably unintentional. Aphra Behn wanted to be recognized for it, but there's a story behind this, so let's get to it and find out a little bit more about who Aphra Behn was. Okay, so Aphra Behn was English, and this is several centuries after the time of Hrothsvitha. Aphra Behn was born around 1640, and she passed away in 1689, so she didn't live very long. We don't know what her real name or lineage is. We don't know who her real parents were. We have an idea of maybe because she went to Suriname with a family, John Johnson and his family, his son, his wife, and lived over there for a little while. John Johnson ended up dying very shortly thereafter, so they ended up trekking back to England. But the question is, why was she with this family in the first place? And it was either because she was biologically their daughter, or that she was either related to them, or maybe they just a kind couple that took her in because she didn't have a family. Her name, Aphra Behn, is actually an alias. It's a nom de plume. Behn is either her husband's first name or last name. I think it's his first name, and that's the name that historically that we know her as. She lived in Suriname, as I was saying, that influenced her novel that was written right before she passed away in 1688. It was called Oronuko, but we're not going to get into that too much. It just talked about her time with indigenous people in Suriname. So her story of how she got how she got into writing plays is interesting. She married a Dutchman, but then he died in 1665, and so she needed to find a source of income because she didn't have family. She had no children at that point, so she ended up taking up two jobs. One, she started writing, and she wrote more than just plays. She also wrote novels and poetry, and she started writing. And she also took up a job as a spy for the King of England. Now, King Charles II was on the throne, and since she had that connection with the Dutch, she was, because of her husband, she was sent to the Dutch courts to be a spy, and her spy name was Estrella. So that seemed to go all right for a little while until King Charles ended up not sending her any money. So she would write to him saying, hey, I need money, you need to pay me, and he wasn't doing it. So she ended up having to borrow a lot of money. She went into debt to just hop on a ship and get back to England and start all over. But she was in so much debt that she ended up being put in debtor's prison. So her life was really a mess, and she ended up writing in prison to make up enough money to pay off her debts and get out. And she survived, and she did, and she became the first professional female playwright. That being that she used it solely as her source of income. She used it as her living, as her career, as opposed to something that she did on the side. She, like we had mentioned a little bit earlier, she wanted to focus on women, but not so much about making a more accurate portrayal of women, but also in writing about women-centric things and topics. She felt that it was high time that women would step out from the shadow. So going further than Hrothsvitha, she sought to turn the spotlight onto women. Why not talk about women? Why not write about female characters and about what they were interested in and what they felt, what made them upset? Her most well-known play is called The Forced Marriage. It was written in 1671, and as you can tell by the title, we probably have a good idea on what that was about. Her females that she wrote tend to be heroic and dynamic and autonomous, which even though things were improving for women during the Renaissance and during this time of enlightenment, it still was very hard to be a woman back in those times, and to be an autonomous female, that definitely was something she was speaking out of experience, as she was a single woman in the spotlight writing. And she was considered, it was very scandalous of her to have the career that she had at this time in history, but she is definitely held up as an icon now, and we look back at her and honor her for being courageous enough to rise above her circumstances. I mean, back then, women in her situation usually ended up going into prostitution or becoming an indentured servant, and she didn't want to do that. She ended up becoming successful because she put her hand to the plow and decided, or I should say, put her hand to the pen, and she was a success story, and that is why she is fierce. This lady, Swarnakumari Devi, has a little bit of a sad note to it. I was looking for a woman who was not from Western culture, and I know there are many out there, but I knew that it would be hard to find. So as I was digging around, I found um, that this woman, and she actually is not completely unknown to me in the fact that I have read some of her brother's work. Now, I could not find a quote directly from her. In fact, I had a hard time finding her works accessible on the internet just to see if I could find an excerpt of something that she wrote from one of her plays or her novels or anything like that, and I couldn't find anything. Um, the purpose of this quote is to kind of sum up what I feel is her statement about her career. And since I couldn't find anything from her, I did find something from a book that was written about several women who were writers of Indian nationality. And this is what it says. One cannot today claim that Swarnakumari Devi's writing is comparable to that of her brother Rabindranath, whose mature work places him among the most distinguished of 20th century writers in India. But one can ask, had she received the support and encouragement she deserved, what might she not have achieved? So she lived in the shadow of a very wealthy, gifted family. Some background here. I have read one of Rabindranath Tagore's works of literature. He writes poetry. He's a very, very famous Indian poet. She's his younger sister. Um, and it is sad to think that, you know, what could it have been? What could have her fingerprint on art have been if she had been given the encouragement and mentorship and even just the attention, the publicity that her brother got? And unfortunately, her name is very much in the shadows and even mostly unknown to her own people, the Indian people, let alone those of us that are out here on the other side of the world. So let's talk about her. Let's find out why she was fierce. So Swarnakumari Devi is, that's her full name. I'm not really sure how last names work, but she is part of the Tagore family, even though her last name is Devi. When she got married, her name was Gozal, but professionally she's known as Swarnakumari Devi. She was from the Bengal province. She's a Bengali writer, but she was also a musician and activist as well. She was born into a very wealthy, high caste Indian family. Her brother, as we already talked about, was the poet Rabindranath Tagore. She came from a very artsy family, and then she married into a very politically prominent family. So she came from a place of privilege. She was not poor, she was educated, she had access to everything. Um, One thing that kind of changed the direction a little bit, I think, is that there was a story that I read about how she was being schooled by her governess. Her dad found out or was observing, and he didn't like that the governess wasn't really teaching her. He saw that the governess was basically just having Swarnakumari write copy out things that were written, but not actually instructing her, teaching her anything. She's just basically practicing her handwriting. And so he fired the governess and had her brother's tutor um, school her and with him. So she got an education alongside her brother by a male tutor. And so that gave her a leg up. She was the first female novelist for the Bengali family or excuse me, the Bengali people. And she also wrote several plays and one opera. Her opera was written in 1879. It's called the Basanta Utsav, which translates to Spring Festival. If you were to Google Basanta Utsav, which like I did, you'll find not much about Swarnakumari Devi, but you'll find out a little bit more about Holi, which is a festival that happens in spring, in the Indian country and in some of the Indian populations throughout the world, which is basically a celebration of spring where people throw a bunch of paint at each other and you're dressed in bright colors, and it's almost like their non-religious version of Easter, and they're celebrating. So I'm assuming that the opera has some kind of connection with that. Now, as far as her plays, her most famous one is called The Wedding Tangle, and it focuses specifically on class struggle and widow marriage. That became something that was very important to her in her lifetime. In fact, I feel, as I did the study about her and her influence on culture in the Bengal province, it seems that her aspirations to help women surpassed her desire to write. She ended up founding this organization called the Saki Samiti, which was specifically to helping Hindu widows. It actually inspires me because it's something similar to what I want to do. Basically, it's taking care of the physical needs of these widows and their children, and then giving them training in education and also job vocational training to get these women back in society so they don't have to live impoverished or in any kind of vulnerable position. So that is Swarnakumari Devi's legacy. I do wish that there was more we can find out about her career with plays. She is revered, but she's so under the radar. I hope that as time goes by, people will dig a little deeper and maybe bring her plays onto bigger stages or even make an adaptation for it in film, because she seems like she was a very, very noble woman and very gifted, and she just doesn't hold as big of a audience as I think she should. But she did so much for women and just for people in general, using her influence through her husband in politics and using her wealth and her positions in society to do good. And that is why Swarnakumari Devi is fierce. So this last one, I was very much inspired by the story of Vinnette Carroll, just reading about the struggles that she went through. This quote here, though, is my favorite of the four. Vinnette Carroll said, "I've had a great deal of hurt in the theater, both as a Negro and as a woman, but I don't get immobilized by it. I tell myself that no one individual is going to make it impossible for me." So let's talk about Vinnette Carroll. Why is she fierce? So Vinnette Carroll was born in 1922 and she passed in 2002. She lived exactly 80 years. She was born in New York City, and she lived in Jamaica for a good portion of her childhood, but ended up going back to New York City. Her family wanted her to become a psychologist. They weren't against her interest in theater, but they didn't see that as being a career for her. And she ended up going to school and got a scholarship for drama, and she got a bachelor's and a master's. She ended up trying to get into a psychology degree as well, but she ended up dropping out because she wanted to pursue theater full time, and I'm sure she disappointed her family a little bit, but she ended up probably making them proud if they were able to see what she was able to accomplish. She spent a long time just kind of in the background because she was black, and that was hard during this time, and she's also a woman, so it was hard enough being just a member of regular society, but also getting into theater and the arts, that it had to be very assertive and very aggressive in trying to get your voice heard. So for a while, she did a lot of performing, and she did some writing as well, but it didn't happen until 1970s, 1972, that her first play was put on Broadway, and that was Don't Bother Me, I Can't Cope. That's the name of the musical. She directed that and she wrote that. There was one other play that was on Broadway for about 4 days, and they don't really count it, but it was. It was called Trumpets of the Lord. She wrote that, and it was based on sermons, and it didn't last very long on Broadway, unfortunately. It had a lot of success on the off-Broadway track, but she had to try again, and she didn't get a successful show until Don't Bother Me, I Can't Cope came around. She also wrote a play called Your Arms Are Too Short to Box with God, which I absolutely love that title. I think that is fantastic. And what's more is it is based on, it's an adaptation of the Gospel of Luke, or the Gospel of Matthew, pardon me. So there seems to have been some kind of influence of Christianity on her writing. I didn't really find a lot about that. She seemed to have been written about more by secular sources. But to have a play that's an adaptation of the Gospel of Matthew, it says a lot. She has 10 Broadway credits, 4 as a performer and 6 as a director and or writer. She was nominated for multiple Tonys, but she holds a record as being the only Black woman to receive a nomination for directing. Now, she also was in some films and television as well, but those are definitely outshined by her work with theater, and Broadway especially. Now, her legacy and what I love most, and it's similar to what our previous woman, Miss Devi, did, is that she sought to help people. And what she ended up doing, even before she was successful, is she established the Urban Art Corps. So even before she got onto Broadway, she made this program that was geared at helping Black and Hispanics that wanted to work in theater arts. This could be not just performers, but people who wanted to write and direct and produce, basically people like her. And it was through this organization that she was able to kind of polish herself off and prepare for when she actually did break out onto Broadway. And then she continued, even into her old age. She mentored, and some notables are Lee Tyson and James Earl Jones. They are alumni, I guess, for the Urban Arts Corps. They were touched in some way by her work in that organization. And that is why Vinnette Carroll is fierce. I hope you enjoyed this. I had a lot of fun digging into these people. Up until today, I didn't know who any of these people were. I just learned about them specifically from the research for this presentation. So you learned something new, I learned something new. Here are my sources. There are quite a few of them. And happy reading. Have a good day.